but we can't afford it. We can't afford ourselves. Our system has become so cumbersome that we can't afford ourselves.
Well, I'm arguing that that system is even more cumbersome and will be less affordable in the long run.
I agree. But
right here, I'm sorry.
Yes,
try to keep it moving around.
We have talked a lot about reducing the deficit lately, and I know that our country spends more on the military than all other nations in the world combined, and you have consistently wanted to raise that. Now, a big chunk of this money is going to organizations like Halliburton and Blackwater, or private contractors that have been caught overcharging the federal government billions of dollars. Now, if you're really concerned about the deficit, are you doing anything to get these contracts pulled from Halliburton and Blackwater, organizations that you know have ripped off the government of billions of dollars? And if not, why?
Yeah, where you have contractors who have broken the law and ripped off the government, then they need to be pursued and prosecuted. One of the reasons that you have Halliburton's a favorite target, particularly from our friends in the DFL, because former Vice President Dick Cheney was at one time the CEO there, so I understand it's a very tempting target, if you will. But Halliburton, through Brown and Root, provided the dining facilities and the food for U.S. and Allied forces. We just didn't have the size of the armed forces to do that. So somebody needed to do that. I guess it'd be better if somebody other than Dick Cheney been the CEO, and then they'd just be the nice people providing dinner. But if they're ripping off, and they're caught ripping off, then they need to be punished for it. Yes, ma'am.
Are you going to make a strong case for tort reform for health care?
I think that you cannot seriously get at lowering the costs of providing health care without medical liability reform. And in the proposal that I supported in the Republican substitute, which, by the way, I was thrilled that we got to even offer it. We were allowed 30 minutes to explain it against that. But that would save the government, from government spending through Medicare and other things, almost $60 billion. And that allowed in our substitute the ability to offer those high-risk pools for the federal government to put that in the budget cycle, that's how all those budgets work. Very seldom you see it. I mean, bills work based on a 5 or 10 year budget. It kind of depends on which body. Washington can find a way to keep you confused. There's no question about that. But that money that comes from the tort reform that you're talking about is what allowed the high-risk pooling to address the pre-existing conditions. And the Democrats and Republicans took the same approach on that, by the way. You have to have high-risk pooling if you're going to address pre-existing conditions.
But don't you run into opposition just because of the whole lawyer aspect and how
yes,
many lawyers are in politics?
Yes, ma'am.
As Shakespeare said?
You do. There's no question about that. I was very pleased to see at the State of the Union that President Obama said he thought that was something we ought to look at. He was talking about a small pilot program. I don't think we need a pilot program. I think we need to move out and get serious tort reform because of that. Defensive medicine is driving up costs. I was visiting a radiology center just this week and talking to them about how many exams are being ordered through defensive medicine. And these are very, very expensive. These are $4,000 and $5,000 and $6,000 for PET scans, CAT scans, MRIs, and the like. And there needs to be a way to get that under control. And it's, again, I was heartened to hear President Obama talk about that. It's something that I think we ought to take up and address, and maybe we can get some bipartisan support for it. Yes, sir.
Can you explain to me the complexities of the issues of the interstate commerce of the healthcare industry, the health insurance companies, the being able to purchase health care across state lines, and what, in fact, will that do to the costs of, I mean, I understand it'll bring it down, but do we have any statistics out there that would show me how much money me and my wife and my family could save on an annual basis if it were to be opened up to a broader spectrum of a competitive nature, you know?
There may be such a per family number. I don't know what it is off the top. I don't know if you,
I mean, 'cause
Maybe
I
that's
think-
the downside of not having a microphone. I'm not sure you can hear the questions, but.
Because I think if people, I think if there were something like that, if people could put their hands around something tangible and say, wow, you know, instead of us paying $1,200 a month for our insurance plan, if this, you know, proposal, you know, could pass, I might be able to spend, you know, $450 a month.
What I can tell you is that when the Congressional Budget Office scored, that's means when they put the cost, the price to these different bills, when they scored the Republican alternative, that little kind of short stack right there, they said that it would save up to 10% of the premium cost. Not in all cases, it depends on if it's a group plan, individual plan, and so forth, but it would actually start to drive down the cost of insurance, whereas the big stacks do not do that. The cost curve, as they say, for health costs goes up with those big stacks, which just makes you wonder why do we have these big stacks? But that was the point of our alternative, was to drive down the costs of insurance, and that's what that does. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so Congressman, related to health care and entitlement spending, recently Governor Plenty, had a budget proposal at the state level which relied heavily on receiving additional federal aid for Medicaid spending.
Right.
Can you comment on how long-term is that solution? How long can the federal government continue to extend these extra monies for Medicaid if we're facing these major budget deficits at the federal level?
I'm not sure I can even comment on the short term likelihood of that, because that's not passed legislation. I understand that controversy has arisen here between the legislature and the governor. I'm not sure if everybody's been following that, but I do know this, that Medicaid costs are a pretty heavy burden for every state. And I think all states, but maybe 4 now, are in the red and facing the kind of problems we are. Now, thankfully, Minnesota is not facing the same problem that California is facing, but clearly we're running a problem here in the red. And again, one of the problems with the biggest, tallest thing there, that's the Senate bill, is it increases the number of people who are eligible for Medicaid in every state, and therefore makes the state pay even more for Medicaid. There is one state that's accepted, of course, and that would be Nebraska. But, and interesting, Ben Nelson is now saying, gosh, maybe he shouldn't have done that. But nevertheless, that big tall stack right there is an exception for the state of Nebraska. They don't pay those additional costs. And again, that's part of the horrible problem that is going on in Washington. And you can blame both parties if you like, but right now, I'm particularly irked at the majority party for putting that together behind closed doors and making those kinds of deals, and then they come out and it's in the bill. That's not the way to do business. It's inexcusable, and Republicans and Democrats have been guilty of that. Yes, sir, you've had your hand up for a long time.
Congressman.
Sir.
What's your plan to give us, everybody, health insurance? Give us your plan so that we can support you when you go back to talk to our president. But give us your plan. Tell us exactly what your plan is, so everybody in the United States, or most everybody in the United States, gets health insurance that we can afford.
You made a great point there in saying that most people get, or almost all people, under no stack of paper up there does everybody get insurance. Not the big tall Senate bill, not the little shorter House bill. Under none of those stacks of paper does everybody have insurance. And Catherine, do you have let's just outline some of those things that are in the. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't have. Yeah, there we go. Can you read that?
I don't.
Okay. Those.
I can see it now. My class.
These things are what's contained in this bill. Okay? This isn't just an idea, it's actual written legislation. This is the bill that got introduced as a substitute and for which we were given 30 minutes to explain. It's not a good way to do business. But my point, and I'll reiterate it again, if you're going to go forward and try to solve the issue of the cost of health care and the cost of health care insurance, and you have to do it in the political climate that there is today and last year and 6 years ago and 6 years from now, you need to do it from scratch. And that's the call that we have been making to President Obama. Please, let's sit down and start from scratch, and don't start with your 4,000 pages competes with our 300 pages. Yes, sir.
Just another comment on healthcare. We've developed procedures that are very, very expensive. My wife's been treated for cancer for almost 15 years. Tremendous amount of money. You know, we keep people alive, and there is no cheap way to do it. We expect to do that.
That's correct. That's right.
Congressman,
And we do have here, the gentleman behind you talked about other countries that have universal care. I mean, we were talking to some leading oncologist in Great Britain as we were going through this, and he just said flatly, your chances of survival for cancer are better here than there.
Those countries ration it.
And we just need to recognize that what are you giving up if you take a system that says the government's just going to pay for everything? And I just don't think that's the way to go. Let me come over here. Yes, ma'am, right here.
Congress, as far as
I appreciate all the people who are here.
Could we hold it down just a little bit? Do you have a microphone? Give her a microphone, Carol.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate the opinions and the things that I've learned from all the people who have spoken. The reason I'm here tonight is I saw you on television confronting regarding the bonuses that our servicemen hadn't gotten.
Yeah.
I was furious. I suppose I could have known that before, but I was so proud of you for And that was what, 2 weeks later, or 2 weeks ago? Is that 3 weeks ago? And now it'll be mid-March before the money is there.
That's right.
That's just not right.
Well, thank you for the little vote there, but let me be clear about this. And I've tried to be clear in every single interview that I've done on this. This is not my effort. This has been one of the rare cases where you have a true bipartisan, bicameral effort to get the Pentagon to do what it was supposed to do.
But you spoke up.
Thank you, but it's only because I'm a member of the Armed Services Committee. And Secretary Gates was coming over to testify on the budget, and I had my staff tell his staff that I was going to ask that question. There was a little miscommunication on their part. His staff told my staff, that's fine, the Secretary is ready to talk about that. Turned out he wasn't. And so he and the other folks were a tad embarrassed, but I didn't set out to ambush him. I set out to make the dadburn point that it's inexcusable that we have soldiers who have been owed this money and haven't been paid because you've got such a huge bureaucracy in the Pentagon, they can't get it up to get it done. And having the opportunity to confront the Secretary, I'm sure made whoever the unlucky action officer was over the Pentagon had new motivation to get it done.
I emailed you. They responded to the email, and then MJ called me.
Oh, good. She's fantastic.
That was awesome.
She's fantastic. Way in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Kline Doyle from Lakeville. I sit here tonight and realize that we could be sitting in the same type of meeting in 30 years unless we start to look at how we are preparing our children to step into your shoes, the shoes of your colleagues, the shoes of those here. And truly, the future of our country depends on how well we educate our children, and history has shown us that putting more money into a broken system is not going to fix it. we've learned a lot in the last 30 years about how we learn, the cognition of learning. We've also learned what works. For example, the government helped fund the development of science kits that have closed achievement gaps that work no matter what the background of the teacher is. We know that works, yet students still go to school and learn from textbooks, not doing science, for example. We've also have in Minnesota a program called the University of Minnesota Talented Youth and Math Program. And watching students in that program, I realized that one of the problems with our system is that we've been looking for so long at the floor. What's the bottom that we can expect kids to achieve? But in that program, they say, we're going to take the ceiling off. We're going to raise our expectations of the kids. And I was astounded at the response of the students who are learning Calculus 3 in linear algebra. So my question for you is, despite this, and knowing that we could be here in 30 years still looking at these same issues and problems if we don't show our children or motivate them to learn how to deal with them, why has so little changed in the last 50 years in education? And now that you are looking at rewriting the education law, which I applaud you for, and I'm thrilled to hear that that's happening, what is your goal in doing that?
Wow, that's a great question.
It's hard to hear it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We probably should have used the microphone there too. I won't do her justice because her comments were terrific, but it centers around the fact that we're just not moving like we should be in education. And yet now we have examples where we have been making some real progress. But it doesn't seem to get us going as a whole. There are examples where things are working well, and yet we're still, we have whole school systems where you have less than half of the students graduate, for example, and those that are graduating sometimes are in no condition to be ready for college or employment. And so what are we going to do about it? And she pointed out that we are starting to work on rewriting the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which we know in its most recent version was No Child Left Behind. So let me try to just talk education in several ways, and I hope I'm going to get to your question that I've so inartfully restated. First of all, one of the projects that I have been working on, and I'm sorry to say without any particular success lately, is getting the federal government to step up to its commitment to fund special education, IDEA. The federal government committed, now over 30 years ago, made it a law that every school has to provide education for children with special needs. And as part of that program, the federal government, was supposed to provide 40% of the additional funding. We've never gotten to 20%. In about 2006, we hit the peak. We hit almost 18%. We never reached 20, and it's been coming back down since that time. And it is enormously frustrating because whether I talk to Republicans or Democrats, they will agree that since the federal government has put this in law and the courts have further mandated it, the federal government ought to meet its commitment. And in my very first time that I ever met the new Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan, he was at a hearing, and I asked him why President Obama wasn't putting it in the budget. I didn't get, frankly, a very satisfactory answer, and then since that time, I've had several opportunities to speak with him, and I suggested that if President Obama would put it in his budget, that Congress wouldn't take it out. But if he didn't put it in his budget, Congress will always find something else to spend that money on. And so in this budget, we need about over $20 billion more to reach that 40% funding. In this budget, the President put in $250 million. That's not even this much of how much we need. And that's very frustrating because Republicans and Democrats will say, yeah, we ought to do it, but we can't seem to get it in there. And I was very angry with President Bush, by the way, for those of you who think I'm just always partisan here. He should have put it in the budget. I couldn't get it there either, although in those years, the percentage, the dollar amount of the percentage went up. It went up steadily. It wasn't until 2006 that it started to turn back down. But neither party has fixed it. We need to continue to press that. And my argument with Chairman George Miller of the committee and with Secretary Arnie Duncan is before we start another dad-burn education program, we need to take care of this one first. Because every school district in America would benefit if we would do that. Instead, we started a new program to build green schools. I don't know why the federal government should be in the school construction business at all, but certainly you shouldn't start a new program until you take care of this commitment. So that's one thing. Now if you look at No Child Left Behind, well, one thing I can guarantee is the new law won't be called No Child Left Behind. It's got a lot of problems. Many of us would say that it was and I believe it is, the largest intrusion of the federal government into education ever. Some of that intrusion has not worked out, as even its earlier supporters would say. I don't ever talk to a teacher, or mostly to parents, or superintendents, or principals, that like the idea that somebody in Washington is determining whether or not their school is failing. And the way it was put together, I'm afraid that the critics are right, that by 2014, virtually every school in America would be failing to make adequate yearly progress. So that's by way of saying the law needs to be redone. And I have a lot of concerns about what the new law is going to look like because I'm very resistant to putting the federal government in charge of our schools. Having said that, I have to applaud Secretary Duncan and my House and Senate colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, for saying that unlike that effort, where one party goes off and writes the bill, in this effort, they have said we're going to sit down with a blank piece of paper and start to work on this bill. So my staff on the Education and Labor Committee, the Republican staff and the Democrat staff in the House are working with Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, with the Department of Education and with people from the White House to start talking about what will this new legislation look like. I hope that we can put something together that I'll be able to support. Arnie Duncan has stepped up and taken on the education special interests in ways that I find astonishing. He said, we have failing schools around the country, but we have charter schools in many places that are working, and states ought to allow more charter schools. Minnesota already has a pretty vibrant charter school. Some of them are good, some of them not. But many states had caps or wouldn't allow them. And if you look at what's happened in New Orleans, Secretary Duncan got himself in real trouble by some comments he made about Katrina, but he was right about a piece of this when he said that as New Orleans has tried to rebuild itself, it's built a very vibrant charter school effort where parents have more choices, and it's the best their school system has been in New Orleans. So I applaud his approach to that. He believes, and he has been very clear, and he has taken on the teachers' union in saying we need to be able to remove teachers who are doing a bad job. And you need to reward teachers who are doing a good job. We need a system that does that, and I agree with you. We need to be able to do that. So my point is that we've got some things that we can talk about here, and what I most applaud is that from the very beginning, before there is one of those draft monsters, we're going to talk about this legislation, and it's underway today. If that answers your question. Yes, sir, you haven't asked a question.
Congressman Kline, Mike Angelo, Morristown. You're talking about programs and stuff, and what are your views on the question forum for the 2010 census? I hear it's got 10 questions. The only question that I see online is that where do people live and how many? and then it goes into race and everything else. If we really want programs, for example, our neighborhood, we got to know who's in our neighborhood. And I think the biggest problem is that because of the economy, we have a national migration. We have people going to Texas. We have people going to California. We have people going all over, exodusing out of Minnesota because there's no jobs. What is your take on the 2010 census, and how important is that in this district?
Great question. The 2010 census, like every census, is constitutionally mandated. You have to have a census. I think we've already put some things out, and we have a public service announcement. If we haven't, we will again. I'm encouraging people to fill out the census form. I'm not sure we need this huge form with all the questions, but the point is people need to be counted. And the danger here is that if you're not here physically, and I know you may not admit it yourselves because you're all here in February, but you know people who aren't here right now. They're in Florida, and they're in Arizona, and places like that. And if they pick up a form there and fill it out, they won't be properly counted, and we can show a smaller population than we are. So it's important that people fill out their census form that they get at their residence here in Minnesota. Because I think where you're going with this is that Minnesota is kind of right on the bubble on whether we lose a congressional seat, for example. We go from 8 House members to 7. Now, I saw a piece the other day that said that because of the down economy, people weren't, rushing off to live someplace else and quite the numbers they used to be, and we ought not to be in that position of losing a seat. But the census is very, very important, not just for whether we have 7 or 8 congressional seats, but it affects the makeup of state House districts and state Senate districts, and we have a new state senator here who's been, probably paying attention to that. So it matters that we do it and that you do it from your Minnesota address. Yes, sir.
Where I'm going with this is that I was reading in the Hamilton's Federalist Papers of 1787 about, he quotes, people of America, ... and my fellow citizens. And where he was going with that was that we have a lot of indigenous people, we have a lot of immigration here in our generation. With the census, is this census going to encompass those of different citizen status, non-citizens also? Because the way it works, programs only come into a neighborhood or a state or at the local or district level if they have a need for it by populace, by enumeration. That's what the Constitution is all about, we the people.
Right.
But with the census, is it we the people citizens, or we the people or we the people of America? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, my understanding is we're counting citizens, but the census is looking at demographics across the whole country. My point is, I'm not here to defend any part of it. I know you want to have a comment on this, and I'll get right to you. It's not to defend any part of the census form, but to say that it is constitutionally required. It is important that we be counted, and in order to be counted properly, you need to fill out your form that arrived at your residence here, and not when you're on vacation or touring. And I'll be right to you, Wendy. Let me go.
2 quick comments back
Yes,
to
sir.
education. The charter schools in many cases don't have all the facilities to do what the public schools have. They contract with the public schools for services that they can't perform. Public schools are under the gun for that. Mainstreaming is a huge problem in terms of doing a good job in the classroom. You're teaching to EBD kids, slow kids, average kids, talented kids. It's very difficult to teach those kids. My wife has been a teacher for a number of years. She's retired, but I know a little bit about that. Second thing is health care. We have to have some skin in the game. If I smoke and detract from my health, I should pay for it. we shouldn't take in everybody that, we need to be responsible and take care of our own health to a degree. If I don't exercise, keep my weight under control, if I smoke, if I drink, if I do excess, I shouldn't get the same health care cost that you do if you take care of yourself.
You ought to be able to, picking up on that last point, you ought to be able to, if you're an employer, for example, you ought to be able to reward people who stop smoking, watch their weight, and so forth. And again, it's not up there anymore, but that's something that I think we ought to be encouraging and not stopping. And in the huge bill there, that bars employers from making that distinction and saying if you're going to go down to the gym and you're going to do these things, you're going to pay less than if you smoke, don't go to the gym, eat multiple value meals, and so forth. Wendy, you've had your hand up.
I got a follow-up question on the census as to how it relates to military personnel, because when my husband and I were serving in Germany in 1990, we never got to fill out a census form. The Army filled it out for us and told us where we belonged, apparently. But I now will have a son serving in Afghanistan in April, and my brother-in-law has been in the Army for 20 years, and he still votes in Minnesota absentee, but he hasn't actually lived in Minnesota during all that time. Are the military people going to get to fill out a form and choose what state they want to be a citizen of?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if you can hear about how's the census going to apply to those people in the military?
They're exempt.
Pardon me?
They're exempt. They're already counted for in formation.
Although I do remember, well, maybe it was my wife that was filling it out. I do remember census forms coming to the house while I was still on active duty, but they're...
My son's in Afghanistan right now, and he's a Marine, and it doesn't affect him. The Marines account for him. They know where he's at. They know where his hometown is. He's accounted for.
And every military member has to have a home record.
Right.
And that's what they use it based on.
Right. They usually find a state that doesn't have an income tax. That's just kind of how that... Yes, sir. I'm trying to... Yes, sir.
Hi, Brian Bazil.
Yes,
sir. I'm hearing a lot of stuff that's really important, but to me, the most important that our problem is right now is jobs.
Right.
I live in an industry that people are not buying because they're out of a job.
Right.
That's taking money from my family. That's taking money from everybody's family. To me, food on the table is more important than if my son's going to have a shot.
Right.
How do we stimulate jobs?
Right. The question is, how do you get jobs? There's clearly a difference in opinion in Washington. The president's idea about jobs was to pass the stimulus bill last January, was scored at $787 billion, and then they recomputed on the baseline this year at $862 billion, and that doesn't count the interest that you pay on the money that you have to borrow to do that, and I would argue that unemployment has continued to go up and we've continued to lose jobs. He would argue that we would have lost more jobs if we hadn't done it. In fact, I've heard him make that argument. I would say that there was a better way to do it. Again, this was a partisan issue, shouldn't have been, but they wrote a bill over here and then said, okay, you guys can come up with an alternative. We had a better alternative that would have immediately benefited businesses, small businesses particularly, with in effect a 20% tax cut for small businesses that they could count on immediately and start to create jobs. And just a comment there, Christina Romer, who is the head of the President's Council on Economic Advisors, was asked this summer in an interview, why isn't the stimulus working? Where unemployment's going up. This is before it even hit 10%. Why isn't the stimulus working? And she said, well, there were tax cuts in the stimulus, and those are working. I agree with her. There were tax cuts. It's not the way I would have done tax cuts, but that was money that went immediately into the economy. And the shovel-ready project stuff, as most of you know, most of that money has not been spent yet. So there was a way to get money into the economy where it could do the most good right away by giving tax breaks to families and businesses so they could have the money immediately on hand. That was not the approach taken. And so now the president has come out and said, okay, I've got another jobs bill. Now, it was called a stimulus, now it's called a jobs bill. We're going to spend $30 billion, or I think Harry Reid said it's only going to be $15 billion or something like that, and we're going to have these targeted tax cuts where we're going to go to a small business and say, we're going to give you a $5,000 tax credit if you hire somebody with that money. That's not a very good way to really to get the economy to grow and generate jobs, because small businesses may desperately have the opportunity to expand their business, but they may need a capital improvement, not to hire somebody. And plus it just begs the question, who you're hiring, is that a real hire, and do you fire them 6 months later and all that sort of thing. So we have a difference of opinion again on what to do about jobs, but I'm concerned that the huge amount of money spent and the huge amount of deficit has grown employment in Washington, D.C., indisputable, more people at work in Washington, but that's not what we need to do to get jobs in Faribault and in Morristown and places across Minnesota.
What's your suggestion then?
Pardon me?
What's your suggestion?
I just gave it.
I didn't hear anything.
I'm sorry, the suggestion was that we provide a tax cut equivalent to 20% of the income to small businesses across the country, and do it immediately. As soon as you pass that, that's money that they have in their hands that they can use to grow jobs. That was the suggestion. Yes, sir.
I think for 15 years in a small business, okay? I didn't make any money. So any tax cut wouldn't have helped me. What I needed was customers with money tingling in their pockets.
Exactly.
What would have grown. Now giving me or anybody a tax cut wouldn't have gotten customers into my business.
Sure it would.
How?
Because if you give tax cuts
to
families and small, well, that's how you have money. If the government doesn't take the money away from you, you may not have been making money, but this man probably was. If I don't take the money away from him, he's got money to come to your business. That's how tax cuts work immediately. You don't have to wait for bureaucracy to gin up how it's going to spend that money. It's ready immediately.
Well, didn't the president
Why
us some money
wasn't I
back?
successful then?
Sorry, I cannot answer that.
I didn't pay any taxes because I didn't make any money.
The president
cannot answer that.
The president gave us all some money back, didn't he, last year? And not a real lot.
Yes.
Did that help?
Yes. And that was Christina Romer's point, that there were tax cuts as part of that stimulus, and that worked. And arguably did. I'm arguing there are better ways to do a tax cut, but clearly that was money in the hands of people. Some people saved it, some people spent it. It was very temporary. It's not like going to a business and really letting them make sound business decisions with more money immediately to hand. But yes, it worked. And if you spend billions of dollars, you're going to see some at least spotty improvements in employment. But the tax cuts, which were much more across the board, were, as Christina Romer said, working.
Congressman, we only have time for about one more question.
Oh, man. Yes, sir. You haven't asked one yet.
Yeah, on the stimulus and how to create jobs, I've had small businesses for most of my life, and so I understand what it, when would you feel like going out and hiring people and expanding and starting a new business? First of all, at $862 billion on the last stimulus bill, the cost of it, or projected cost of it, divide that by the 2 million jobs that the White House says they saved or created. Even at that number, which I suspect is way high, you get $462,000, or around $400,000, let's say, per job. Now, anybody can create jobs at $400,000, and I'm sure the people aren't getting $400,000, so I don't know where the rest of the money goes. So that was obviously a very poor expenditure for the government. A lot of stuff that the government should be doing, or specifically the White House, I think, and Congress too, is what businesses want is they want to know the rules. They want a good, consistent future where they can project out and plan. In this economy and what's going on in the White House and what's going on with all these different bills, health care and all this stuff, it's a big unknown out there.
Exactly.
All businesses are looking, they're scared. They have no idea what the future is going to bring. They don't want to invest. They don't want to hire. It's just, and FDR had the same problem back in the Great Depression. He was out badgering businesses to hire, and he was attacking them. And they were just pulling in their horns and saying, we don't know what to expect from this guy. And we got the same thing with Obama, who was going out there and chasing, and probably Congress, other people in Congress as well, it's not just him. 77% of business owners feel that government is anti-business. And they're not going to get people they're not going to get a nice rebound in the economy if they're badgering people into not taking risks. Businesses are just asking their people to work overtime hours and hiring temps because they don't have any confidence to hire. So that's the problem. The whole environment is going to stall this economy the way we're doing it.
It's well said. I couldn't agree more. It's clear that there is an enormous amount. It's clear that there's uncertainty. It's clear it's not clear. But
uncertainty, exactly.
Uncertainty is reigning supreme. There are just so many unanswered questions. What are we going to do about that? What about the cap and trade taxes that are out there? What are businesses, what do they expect about that? There are just giant uncertainties. And until we can get rid of that uncertainty, we're going to have that trouble. We have the so-called Bush tax cuts that are all poised to come back in, and some of those are in President Obama's budget, and businesses are trying to figure out how to deal with that as well. And it's a horrible climate, and I don't think that businesses are going to be ready to hire until they get something that they can count on, and that's another problem with this. I'll give you a $5,000 tax credit if you'll go hire him for $40,000 or $30,000 or something. You're going, well, wait a minute, I don't need him right now. What I need is a new bulldozer. And so I take your point. I think that you are exactly correct.
First we were told no streaming. Then, midway through the forum, I was about to ask a question, and in no uncertain terms, Troy came up to me and said, no questions.
Cold February night. Questions today. Drive carefully. Be glad that we know what to do with snow out here, unlike what they have.
Troy, how come I wasn't able to ask questions?
Are you a reporter?
Yes.
Okay. You need me to ask questions?
CCO, which is CCO.
Absolutely. CCO has been in the town hall before, and you can ask questions. This is for your constituents.
I actually would have asked more questions than
I'm sure you would have.
And especially about the fence.
I'm not
How can I ever ask him any questions?
First off, is the camera?
No, I'm running. I wanted to get this on tape. I think you should actually justify why you're not letting us
Absolutely. Put me on tape right now.
Yeah.
The reason we don't let you ask a question, this is for the constituents. And you're a part of the media. I'm not looking for people on. Are you asking me a question?
Yeah.
I'm not looking for anyone on the left or the right. Mr. Kline took plenty of questions from the constituents who are here. You are in a credentialed media area, and credentialed media doesn't ask questions. So thanks for coming. We appreciate it.
But I guess, well, too bad, right?